my name is Shivani and I am one of the OFOC event directors. Welcome to the first episode of our interview series. Today we're joined by Sarah Symons, who founded Her Future Coalition in 2005. Since then, the organization has evolved quite a lot, serving thousands of survivors with education, shelter, and mental health programs. Sarah is passionate about empowering survivors to be change makers in their families and communities in places such as Nepal, India, Cambodia, and Thailand. Now, on to the interview to learn more about Sarah and HFC. We really hope you enjoy and learn something new. So, what inspired you to set foot into this field, advocating for women's rights and spreading awareness on human trafficking?
I really wasn't expecting this direction in my life. I actually had a very different kind of career as a songwriter for film and television, and my children were really small. But I saw this incredible documentary about human trafficking of girls between Nepal and India for sexual exploitation. And it was about 20 years ago that I saw it, and it just really devastated me, but also was a huge call to action. And when I saw in this movie the courageous acts of people around the world, including survivors, I felt that I had to find some way to help them. And that led to me starting this organization.
Okay, so what does it mean for you to be able to do that? Oh, sorry.
I mean, for me, it was the only way that I could be in the world with this going on was to do something about it. You know, I felt so shocked. At that time, human trafficking wasn't known. It wasn't a term that people used. It wasn't something people were talking about. I certainly didn't know about it. And if I had heard about it, I would have thought it was like an isolated, terrible, isolated incident and not a human rights emergency affecting, 40 million people, according to the last UN report. So it was really shocking for me. And the individual stories of girls who are so young, so vulnerable, so trusting, and people just preyed on that to be able to use and abuse them and throw them away. And many didn't even survive the experience. It was so gut-wrenching and devastating. And I just said, I just can't be in the world and not do something about this with this going on. And I have to start taking action right now from right where I am in whatever way I can.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you bring up how little people know about human trafficking. I know when I first joined OFOC, I didn't know a lot about it. And I thought it was kind of an issue that impacted only a select few in the world and not something that happened really everywhere. So with that, as someone with a lot of experience in this field, why do you think that it's important to spread awareness on human trafficking?
Well, I think that issues like human trafficking thrive in silence and in shame. And I think because it is an issue to be ashamed of, that this is going on and that it's preying on our most vulnerable people who maybe in many cases were already somewhat invisible, such as kids coming out of foster care or indigenous youth, tribal and indigenous youth around the world. So it's already kind of preying on people who already were so disadvantaged and invisible to many. So it is shameful, and it obviously involves sexual exploitation and rape. And so it's not something a lot of people want to talk about, which I get. But if we're not talking about it, then it's going to keep happening. Us not talking about it isn't making it go away. We need to talk about it, and we need to have open and honest conversations about it and try to address it from each and every aspect, including rescue, demand reduction, and the part that we're involved in, which is rebuilding the lives of survivors, and prevention, working with girls in the most high-risk circumstances to try to prevent this from ever happening.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like human trafficking, what made me so interested in it was that nobody really knew about it. And being a part of OFOC kind of made me a lot more aware of not just the third world countries human traffic, but more the first world countries too. So
for sure. And I think, we need to address it from all the angles, locally and nationally and for sure globally. And I think it's problematic when people have a little bit of information, you know what I mean? They maybe just think, oh, it's just happening in Russia or Africa or somewhere else, India, or they think it's only we need to focus on it only in our own areas. And I just think both are important. We need to address it everywhere and have open and honest conversations about it everywhere.
For sure. I kind of feel like I was not aware of the topic because it didn't really necessarily involve me. But when I figured out that it was like when one of my friends, it happened to a couple of my other friends, I was a bit more aware about it. And I'm like, I really want to do something, even if it's just spreading awareness. So if someone watching this was interested in spreading awareness of this topic, where would you suggest they begin?
Well, I would suggest they first educate themselves. And I feel like more than ever, there's a lot of great resources available. And I'm sure that OFOC can probably send them in the right direction for some of those resources. But I think, documentary films, even some dramatic films that have been made, but not taken, because that's not how it happens, but other films that have been made, and some TV shows and books, and just trying to really educate oneself is a really important first step. And then, bringing it together with your local community, whether that's students groups or your faith community, clubs, whatever, getting other people to be willing to talk about it. And, to be fair, it won't be easy because I think you'll discover, as I did, that you're not going to make you a popular party guest when you start talking about this very difficult issue. And I do feel like your generation is doing better around this and other difficult issues and having a lot more openness. But my generation and the generation older before me, it's been very difficult to, kind of get people to talk about it. So first educate yourself, and then maybe start within small groups that you're in. And if you're in, obviously, in the Bay Area, they should join your club. They should, try to connect with another Future of Change club wherever they are. Come to our website or, our social media to try to learn more that way. And then, once I feel like you've got yourself educated and working within small groups, then you can start to think about larger scale awareness activities. What we found is most effective working in the communities where the girls come from is not like a conversation where it's very boldly talked about, because it's just so stigmatized to talk about sex trafficking. So using dance or, street theater, cartoons and comic books, storytelling in other ways is maybe a little bit more accessible, rather than coming right out and saying, let's come to an event and we're going to talk about this issue. And I found that to be true here as well. It's like, maybe if you can kind of get people in the door with like, hey, we're having an international dinner and we're going to talk about some issues, and then when they get there, you get them in the shallow end and then you pull them in the deep end.
For sure. Now we're going to move on to your TED Talk, in which you had a couple of years ago. So in that TED Talk, you mentioned how 5 of 100 survivors were able to mentally recover from their trauma. So what techniques would you use to build trust and prevent re-traumatization of a survivor?
That 95%, right, are able to recover. I didn't completely hear you right there. Well, in terms of the girls' recovery, I think the very first and foremost thing is for them to feel a sense of safety, which they do not feel when they're initially rescued. Because, of Stockholm syndrome, where they've kind of come to identify or trust with the abusers. And also because they have been brainwashed and maybe have seen people who were hurt or killed if they tried to escape. And also because they may come from families where everyone in the family is involved in this, where it's become so normalized in their culture and community. And they really don't trust people outside of that culture and community, which the rescuers probably are outside of their cultural groups, all kind of from very small, different indigenous communities. So first, creating a sense of safety. And a big part of that, I think, is peer support, and just feeling like you're not alone. There are others here. So the most effective counselors in the early days are survivors who, themselves have been there and can really, really relate. And that's kind of the first phase. And then just in whatever way possible to create a sense of safety. Like, we force nothing. We're not forcing conversations. We're not forcing them to share. We're not forcing them to engage in activities with, at the shelter. No forcing. It's just like, you have some time to just gain a sense of safety. And if you just want to, sit there all day and like pick dandelions, you can do that. Like, you just take the time you need, and being surrounded by others who've been in the same circumstances, and gradually realizing you're not going to be sold again. You're not going to be exploited again. This is a safe place. That gradually that sense of safety comes. And there's other things too, like, just making sure they have nice bedding and things that maybe bedtime has been a very dangerous or triggering time for them. Thinking of activities or sheets or, whatever we can do to like make that a less scary time of day. And then after a few months, I think it really is important to engage in activities. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to be counseling where you're talking head on about what happened, because most people aren't ready yet, even after a couple of months at the shelter. So then they, just some experiential therapies like art therapy, music therapy, play, games. And the counselors have come up with some really brilliant games to kind of help people to begin to connect with who they are and what they like to do in a gentle way. And then after, a period of time of that, they do need at some point to be able to talk about what happened to at least one other person. And I think that's an important part of recovery. It doesn't need to be public. It doesn't need to be, going on Oprah, but I think that they need to find one counselor that they can trust and be able to share what happened and get some, proper counseling around that. Having said that, not everyone is ever able to do that. Like some people never reach that point because the trauma is very, very deeply. They may have been very young when it started, not even having the words for the body parts or what happened, or just needing, in order to survive, to really repress that at a pretty deep level. So not everyone is able to ever have that conversation. And we certainly have girls who, who are now adults, and all they can say about their trafficking is, well, I was lost at a fair, and then the police found me and they brought me to the shelter. And that's, everything else is lost. And it could be like 5 or 7 years, but they're just, not able or not wishing to access it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you mentioned a lot of forms of, art and music to help them cope. I think it's definitely important to have a variety of techniques to help these survivors. And on that note, hell-bent on moving forward was a phrase that you mentioned in your TED Talk. Why do you think that it's important for the survivors to have a goal in mind when looking beyond their trauma?
One thing that I've learned, since I started working in South Asia, in rescue shelters and organizations that are very well established and have been working on this issue for a very long time, like some of them, 40 or even 50 years have been working on this issue with women since partition, and even, throughout the years. They have a great wisdom. And it seems to me that the recovery statistics are much better in South Asia than what we often have in a similar population in the United States. And, I would love to study it, or someone should, but it certainly seems that, many, many more people are able to move forward in a really productive way, in a really joyful way. And very few, only like 3 to 5% really remain stuck in their trauma. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and certainly could be cultural, but I think part of it is this culture of, you've got to move forward. There is no, government safety net for you. These girls don't have a family safety net. They're just, if they're going to survive, they've got to find a way to make that happen. And that sounds really harsh, but that push, that requirement is helpful in some ways, and just kind of forcing people to figure out how to move forward. And then when they get to the point where they're ready to move forward, we try to make sure that there's choices for them, and then to engage them, in productive activities of their choice, whether it's going back to school, or we have girls in grad school and med school in college, or whether it's learning a trade, or some people just want to return to their families, and that might be possible for some want to get married, start their own families. Whatever they want to engage in is up to them, but they have to move forward in something, because there is no safety net for them if they don't. And also, if they don't, they're going to stay stuck in that trauma, and that's not a place you want to, where you want to drop anchor.
For sure. I kind of feel like people assume that as soon as survivors go into a shelter, it's like sunshine and rainbows that they'll automatically be cured. But it's so much more than that. It's just like from the inner heart, they have to try to move on. I totally agree with you. Even though it's harsh, it's the true reality. And you also mentioned how survivors live in gratitude every day. Why do you think this is important for them to live in gratitude given their humble origins and traumatic experiences?
Right. And how do they find gratitude? It's certainly, looking at their situation, they have every right to have not have gratitude, and to feel, extremely resentful about what's happened to them. Again, I think some of it may be the surroundings of being in a supportive environment around others who've had the same experience. and a culture of gratitude that is there within the shelter home. It's certainly not, like you say, not rainbows and, unicorns, but it is a place where at least you're going to be safe and be around other people who can relate to what you've experienced. But I just think somehow the girls instinctively know that they've got to just find something to feel grateful and joyful about and just hold on to it. And they do hold on to it with, like a strong grip. And I don't really know the reasons how they're able to do that. It's still a mystery to me that I'm trying to understand, but it certainly has inspired me. Like every time I come home from my visits with the girls, I'm like, I'm never going to complain again. This is the way to live, is to just be grateful for what we do have and not spend a lot of time, in the things that have happened in the past or whatever things we want that we don't have.
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up, because I know when I first started working with the OFOC too, I thought human trafficking was very gloomy and a lot of it was super dark, which it is, but I've also found the survivor stories super inspiring and how they're able to move forward and live with gratitude. I think it's an amazing thing. And with that, one of our questions is, what are some of the highlights from working at Her Future Coalition?
Oh, there are so many, but I guess the part that is the most wonderful is watching the girls move forward in their lives. And, I have two biological children, and one's graduated from college and one is about to. And it's that same kind of feeling of great joy when, someone you've raised or helped to raise does something that you've never done. It kind of like, it's so thrilling to watch them move forward. Like I say, we have Samah, who's in medical school. She wants to be the first gynecologist in her community. It's a Muslim community where women don't seek any OBGYN care because they're only male doctors and they don't feel comfortable. Or there's Sonali, who works at our office, and she is passionate about taking every training she can in mental health so that she can provide workshops and services for the next generation. Or Anjali, who went back to her village from where she was trafficked and opened a school last year and an anti-trafficking project to prevent the trafficking of the next generation from that area. There's, those are dramatic examples, but there's also people who are just working at a job and, starting a family and moving out on their own and getting their first apartment or, their first pots and pans, having a baby. It's all just so wonderful. One girl, she'd been dreaming, she took photography training like 5-6 years ago and just dreamed of finding a job as a photographer. But it's so hard because just like here, it's very competitive in those art fields and it's very male dominated. She tried and tried, and we tried to help her and we hired her, for our stuff whenever we could. And finally last week, she got a job at a wedding photography studio. And I'm just overjoyed about it, to see dreams come true like that, whatever the dreams are, it is the best part of my work. Plus I love going to India and Nepal and like dancing around with the kids and just sitting in the dirt and making crafts and, doing therapeutic arts with them and just sitting with them, listening to women's stories. I love to be present with the women and girls.
Being an Indian myself, it's so cool to see how the survivors are able to have their own lives, especially in the villages. And being in India, I totally agree. It's a wonderful country and I would take anything to go back there again. But although there are so many highlights, there's also the downside too. So what problems did you first experience when working with human trafficking survivors?
So many, Shivani, so many, because I was really just learning as well. So I was very grateful to local organizations and partners, many of whom I work with to this day, for taking me under their wing and sharing their incredible wisdom with me. And I learned alongside them. So very grateful for that. But even with that, many mistakes along the way. And I think, in the early years, we didn't have very many programs, or options. So there were some girls that I loved that were lost, that, that did go into second generation prostitution. And that was, extremely, extremely heartbreaking and devastating. And, we sort of have a system now for mental health, and we kind of have stages that we take people through. But in the early days, didn't have that understanding or those protocols. And so I think trying to move people too quickly into making a plan for their future, like this one time, I was with this girl and she'd been rescued, you know, like maybe a couple months earlier. She was pregnant. She was about 15, become pregnant in the brothel. And I was like, oh, what would you like to do? We have this, education programs and vocational. And she just sat there and was like sobbing and like she couldn't even answer. And I felt so bad. I'm like, trying to ask someone to make decisions about their life too early is not going to be effective and, is more harmful than helpful. So I felt really bad and learned from that moment forward to pace this more slowly. And also, I think like our dreams are not their dreams. Their dreams are not our dreams. Everyone has her own dreams. And, when someone decides to drop out of school or out of a vocational training program to get married and become a housewife, it's a bummer. It's not what I want for my daughters, but I respect that is their decision and I have to get behind it. And that took me some time to learn how to truly get behind it, not just pretend to be behind it, but to understand that is their choice. And being able to make that choice is a miracle as much as Saba being in medical school. It's still a miracle that they can make that choice. Sometimes they make the wrong choice. They marry the wrong guy and then they come back 2 months later and we take them back and start all over again. And that's okay. But they have that freedom and they have that sense of self and of hope that if it doesn't work out, they can start over and they can come back.
For sure. And I think it's also super important to, recognize that making mistakes is a part of advocacy and, learning from that is so, so important, but it's more important to try than it is to, be afraid of messing up and learning from that. So with that, what are a few goals that you hope to achieve with HFC and OFOC, and where do you see these organizations headed?
I am very excited about OFOC and the partnership, and I feel like through working together, it's got a lot of advantages, but the main one is building the future of her future. That the young generation is going to be taking this forward, and so to be able to develop leaders now at the young age is very important. And then, when you guys are older and when it's time for me to retire, there'll be women, young women who are ready to take up the reins and who share the values of the organization and also bring new skills and new values into it. So I'm very excited about that. And what I see for all of us moving forward is more programs that are survivor led. I think as the women, grow up, who've been in the program for some time and developing their own leadership, they have their own ideas. And I really want to get behind more projects like Anjali's, which is, designed by survivors. I feel like they have a unique perspective that nobody else has. And I love being able to just come alongside them and get them the resources they need to make, their vision come true rather than being about my vision. So I'm excited about more projects like Anjali's, more survivor-led initiatives of all sorts. And in Calcutta, we have this big new learning center, which is focused on computers and English education. So I'm really hoping that some of the people from OFOC will, come over now that COVID's hopefully calming down, be able to come over and be part of that in a physical way and maybe do some training or some peer, workshops. I think the girls will really resonate with you guys for so many different reasons. And I think will be very enriching for all concerned. And now we have a space where we can do it. Before it was a bit tricky to bring a lot of volunteers over because it was like, you had to take them to like a red light area or a rescue shelter or be driving around a lot. And now we have one centralized location. I feel like it's going to be a lot easier and a lot more fun for people to come.
Congratulations. That sounds really exciting. And
thank you. It's amazing, after all these years of being in like these tiny, godforsaken little spaces in the dust, it's amazing to have a beautiful space. Our community's gotten behind it in so many ways. I know you guys have been involved with it, and it just feel like it's going to be a game changer, allowing us to serve a lot more girls and link together a lot more programs and partners, for be able to scale everybody's impact.
I also feel like it's definitely going to spur a lot more awareness, especially if it's like a centralized place. You're able to partner up with these different people and just like hopefully people get more aware, and somewhere what in the future the human trafficking rates will hopefully decrease in these countries where it's very, very popular, unfortunately. I kind of feel like that is it for us. Thank you so much for coming here and letting us interview you. I feel like this was a very wonderful interview. We were able to see just how HFC works and the new goals and futures and your TED Talk. Thank you so much. And I think that's it. Shathviki, do you want to say anything?
No, not really. I think you summed it up nicely, but thank you just so much for sharing your experiences and what you've learned from this whole experience. I know it was super inspiring to me, and I hope that our audience feels the same way too. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the amazing work you guys are doing. Please keep going. We need you.